Welcome everyone to Choice Conversations, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your life, one choice at a time. I'm your host, Chris Stefanik. Let's do this. Hey gang, I'm bringing you today an interview I recorded with Steve Crandall back in the summer of 2013 on leadership effectiveness training. Now, my apologies for this intro. The audio quality is not what I would like it to be. I'm just recording it on my phone. I forgot to bring my mic with me on this trip. I'm right now on vacation with my family. Now, by the time you hear this podcast, I'll be back home, but in order to get it out on time, I need to put together the intro and outro and post it up while I'm on vacation, and I forgot my mic, so bear with me. Next week the show will be back to the audio quality you've come to know and love from Choice Conversations. But yeah, this is an interview on leadership effectiveness training. It was a book as well as a methodology developed by Thomas Gordon, who famously developed parent effectiveness training. And, it's a communications system, it's a conflict resolution system that can help people that, obviously in management positions, but also just anyone who's in a leadership position, be it, in your family, in community organizations, or just, groups of friends or whatever. The skills are excellent at leading people and getting results. So, if you're familiar with Thomas Gordon's work in parent effectiveness training, which I've done several podcasts on, a lot of the stuff in it will sound familiar. That's the beauty of it. Those techniques, they not only work great for kids, they work great for anybody. So check it out, and I think you'll like it. Hello, and welcome to Choice Conversations. I'm your host, Chris Stefanik. Today, I'm going to be talking about leader effectiveness training as developed by Thomas Gordon, and I will be talking with a certified trainer in leader effectiveness training, or we'll call it L.E.T. His name is Steve Crandall. Steve, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris. Glad to be here.
As we're starting here, I'd like to go to the beginning of where you kind of discovered L.E.T. and what kind of path did you take to get to where you are today?
Well, it goes back some time now. I first got exposed to Tom Gordon and the Gordon training people way back in the early 1980s. And even before that, I'd had some exposure to parent effectiveness training, which is really the precursor to leader effectiveness training. But then I was in the human resource and organizational development world, and I was doing training and development, and I was looking for a program that could help people with their communication and leadership skills. And L.E.T. was available then, and I had a chance to take it. And I was really enamored with the whole idea and the whole process. So then, not long after that, one of the largest independent vendors of L.E.T. through Gordon Training, a company called Financial Shares at the time, it was located in Chicago, had recruited me essentially to see if I'd be interested in being a consultant with that firm. And so I made a job change and moved to Chicago and became a consultant with this company. They work primarily with banks and financial institutions, and one of their main product lines was L.E.T. So I really became immersed in it then and learned it well enough to be certified in it and became a teacher of it through this firm. And then several years later, came back to Grand Rapids, which is where I'm based, Grand Rapids, Michigan, and brought it to the company I was working for here called Old Kent Financial, which is now part of the Fifth Third organization, a large banking institution. And it became kind of the mainstay of our management and leadership training for the company then. And in that time then, since then, I've started my own consulting business. I've had it for about 12 years, and it's one of my main offerings. And in that period of time, became a master trainer for Gordon Training, which means now that I can also certify other people to teach this class. So I have a lot of time with it. It's been terrifically valuable to me.
That's great. And so are you just a full-time L.E.T. trainer, or are you doing that on the side while you have
other activities?
There are three threads to my practice. I do a lot of leadership development, and L.E.T is part of that, but I also do sales training and customer service training, and I do a lot of management assessment work, meaning when organizations are going through growth or change, or they're trying to assess whether a person would be a good fit for their company, I do a lot of evaluation on that, and also help them with change management as it relates to growth and mergers of who's staying and who's leaving and those kinds of things. I also do a lot of work with boards of not-for-profits and charitable organizations and schools in the whole arena of board governance, and help those organizations determine the different responsibilities for the board members versus the administration, so that they have some good boundaries of responsibilities and clarity of who's responsible for what. And the last area is I do some human resource consulting, usually for smaller organizations that don't have a very robust function. And that could be a variety of things. It could be recruiting strategies, or it could be policies, or it could be executive compensation work, or those kinds of things. So those are the main threads of my business. But interestingly, a lot of the qualities and skills of L.E.T kind of transcend all of those because they're largely communication skills, and so they come into play quite a bit.
Right. Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun, actually.
Yeah, it is. It's great fun. I often say I should have done it 25 years ago, but 25 years ago I had kids in college and other needs that aren't quite as pressing now. So if I'd known how good it was turning out, I probably would have done it. But you, of course, don't know that.
Right. So I guess we'll talk a little bit about what L.E.T is at this point. Now, I read a great paper from Thomas Gordon called What Every Leader Should Know, and I'll go ahead and post a link to that in the show notes. But within that, he says, the effective supervisor must have the skills of a task specialist, skills of planning and organizing work, as well as the skills of a human relations specialist, skills of identifying and solving sources of member dissatisfaction. The effective leader is task-centered and people-centered. Group members want to be on a winning team, but never at the expense of injuries to their self-worth or self-respect.
Yep. Absolutely.
One of the big themes in my show is nonviolent communication. It was developed by Marshall Rosenberg. He studied under Carl Rogers, just as Thomas Gordon studied under Carl Rogers, so there's a lot of parallels in their work. And one of the things that is really brought to the forefront in nonviolent communication is making sure that in all your relationships, in order for them to be successful, your needs need to be met and the needs of the other person need to be met. When I read L.E.T, immediately I thought, okay, this is applying that philosophy to the supervisor-subordinate relationship.
Right. Yeah, there's some really fundamental underpinnings to this approach, and when I teach the class, I try to have people view it on two levels. I ask them to I promise them they're going to learn some very practical, pragmatic skills that they can take with them and apply immediately in the workplace and at home and with any relationships that they have. And they're language skills, and they're certain kinds of perceptual skills that will be immediately useful. But the other level I really ask them or implore them to think about is the more conceptual level, or the whole idea of this, the way of thinking about this, because I know people who can execute the skills, but if they don't have the underpinning philosophy that goes with it, the skills start to become distorted or used, or even in bad cases manipulative in nature. So the whole idea of understanding the intent is just as important as the skills. And the intent really is this notion of mutuality, this idea that when people behave in ways, they behave more in ways to help themselves than they do to hurt other people. But a lot of times when they do that, it has an unintended consequence of hurting other people. And if a person approaches those behaviors in a way with that understanding, or at least, shall we say, assuming good intent or positive intent, it's not Pollyanna about this. I mean, not everybody's like that. But if they approach it that way, and then they use the language that we're talking about, they have a much better chance of understanding each other and coming to agreement on what to do when there's conflict that allows everybody to come out of it okay, than if they take the traditional kind of win-lose or power approach to problem solving or to expressing the needs that people feel.
So that to me is probably one of the primary ideas, is this idea of no-lose outcomes to conflict, and recognizing that conflict is inevitable, and that's part of being human. So the question isn't so much to avoid conflict. The question is, when it does happen, how do we best productively handle it?
Right. Yeah, and it's really important to realize that you both have the same needs. And this is the same in all your relationships. If you're the parent-child relationship, the husband-wife, etc.
Right.
Both the leader, the manager, the superior, and the subordinate have the same needs from their job, which is status, achievement, higher pay, recognition, self-esteem, acceptance, security, all of these things. And of course, the manager, the leader, he is not going to be able to get his needs met as far as being successful and recognition and higher pay and the like, unless he's also making sure the needs of the organization are getting met, because the superior isn't going to be pleased if he's not getting higher productivity.
Yeah, right.
The leader has to, in order to be successful, meet the needs of his workers, meet his own needs, and then meet the needs of the organization.
Right. That's such an important, Chris, that's such an important point that you've made, because I contend that supervision, I'll use that term in a broad sort of way, management, leadership, supervision, they do have different definitions technically, but let's just say for the moment that we're talking about anybody who has responsibility of influencing the behavior of other people. That position in any organization is one of the biggest secrets that most organizations hoard before they put people in those jobs. They don't really tell them what the job is. And people are surprised when they get into it. I've heard more than one occasion people say, I love the status and I like the money. If I could get rid of the people, it'd be a lot easier.
Right.
It's kind of like customer service people who wish nobody would bother them,
Right.
So, and the reason why it's so hard, because it's the only position that has so many different masters. It has so many different competing interests. The head of the organization, the top of the organization, the institution, shall we say, is looking to these people to take care of or get the organization's needs accomplished through others, as well as themselves. And so those needs are expected to be met by the supervisor. But the supervisor is also the agent of the people that work for that supervisor. They are the gatekeeper in many cases to all kinds of things like working hours or pay or promotability or nature of the work or things like that. And so their people, to one degree or another, are dependent on the supervisor for getting their needs met as well. And the needs of the people and the needs of the organization are oftentimes at odds.
Sure.
So the supervisor has to walk that fine line of being able to be the agent of the folks, but at the same time meet the needs of the organization through those people, and if they have any time left over, meet their own, which is another whole set of things.
Yeah.
So it's hard. It's hard work. It's a hard job, and I think a lot of people don't acknowledge that when they're suggesting people for those positions, and certainly people underestimate how hard it's going to be a good one when they enter into that position.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I'm a manager in my day job, and when I first got into it, I really didn't have any guidance. I didn't have any management training and the like. So, I was kind of stumbling my way along, and fortunately, I'm in a pretty good organization. There's a pretty good structure in place. I have a really great team working for me, so it wasn't a complete disaster, which it could have been, being just flailing along. But since I've discovered Thomas Gordon's work and started implementing those, it just really seems so smooth now. I've gotten to have a lot closer relationship with my employees. We're close on a friends level. And at the same time, I feel like they really want to work hard to help the whole team make the goals. Using the methods presented has really helped to get buy-in, and where now the success of the team and the success of the organization, meeting the organization's goals, they view that as a success for themselves as meeting their own goals, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so you're saying they have kind of a double benefit. They equate their own goals with the organization's mission so that everybody feels that they've accomplished good things for themselves as well as for the whole when they do that.
Right. And I think before I started using these tactics, the work was getting done, but I'm not so sure that it was as much. It was more self-driven and, okay, I just have to do this to get my paycheck or whatever. I think now there's a lot more camaraderie, certainly between me and the subordinates, and then also among themselves, between them. Mm-hmm. These tactics are great at building those kind of relationships and having a good team.
Yeah. Well, it sounds to me like also what you're saying is that in order for you to have gotten there, maybe I'm putting more into this, but in order for you to have gotten there, you had to do a certain amount of self-disclosure, right? I mean, there has to be a certain amount of genuineness to the communication. It's not just, using certain words, but it's getting them a chance to see the real you and how you're feeling and what you think about stuff instead of just portraying yourself as a kind of a cardboard structure of a boss kind of thing.
Oh, sure. One of the things that's mentioned in the book is sending iMessages, which is something we've covered parent effectiveness training on the show previously. Uh-huh. I had Judy Pardo on. She was a P.E.T. trainer, and that's something that's in that book, of course, and it's just something good for any relationship. This isn't management specific, the skill, but of course building the iMessage, part of that is displaying your feelings. First of all, you have to develop a self-awareness to know what your own feelings are, and then you're communicating that. You're opening up to your subordinates and letting them know how you feel.
Yeah. This is a very critical component, again, of the philosophy behind this, and that is the idea that really emotions and feelings are the reason why people do anything. They will house their strategy or their tactics, their approach logically in a more intellectual sort of way, but the motivation of it comes from fairly base things in most cases. They need or want something, and they try to fill their needs through certain actions. And in order for other people to understand how important something is to you or why something is a problem that they're doing or any other kinds of things that's important, especially if you're trying to influence their behavior, they have to have some evidence of what it is that's causing the difficulty and what you think and feel about that, not just this logic of it's wrong or it's bad, but what does it mean to you? What's your inner experience with that? And when you can do that, it gives a lot more credibility to what it is you're trying to say to your folks. You become much more human that way,
Yeah.
I do think, though, that there's inherent risk in that. People feel risk in that because when you do that, you're also letting them in a little bit on the real you. And there's some inherent trepidation on that sometimes, especially in business, especially with men. There's a tendency for people to feel and still believe in the idea that you're best off if you stone-face it and you don't show anything in that regard. And what that usually results in is people can't read you very well. They don't know where you're coming from.
Right.
And it makes it really hard for them to react appropriately or even react with any degree of confidence that it's what you're looking for because there's huge chunks of the interchange that's missing, when people aren't able to do that.
Right. In your experience, do you find that there really is a risk in showing your feelings? Because I kind of liken it in the parent-child relationship. Everyone always says, they don't say don't show your emotions, but what they always say is you can't be a friend of your child. You're the parent, you've got to be the authority figure, you're not the friend. If you're a friend, that's really looked down upon as being a friend. And I'm sitting there saying, okay, I've got to live with this person for 18 years, maybe more. And then beyond that, if I'm doing everything right, we're going to have a close relationship the rest of my life. Hopefully, when I'm lying on my deathbed, my daughter will be sitting there holding my hand. And you're telling me I'm not supposed to be friends with this person? Are you crazy?
Yeah. Right.
I mean, maybe in the business world, because there's that stigma of, you're not supposed to bring emotion into business.
Right.
Maybe if you're doing that with some people, they would not react positively to it. But for me, I've not found it to be a real risk. It's a perceived risk, but not in reality. It's not. I mean, what is your experience?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great question. I'm not sure I have a perfect answer to that, but I'll give you my impression anyway, or what my experience has been. I think, and this may come down to semantics, but I think it's important. I'm not sure the word friend or the way in which that's colloquially used in our society and so forth is exactly the right way to portray the relationship that you want to develop with your children or even with your colleagues at work or your subordinates, if you use that term, your people. Because I think it has a connotation of non-clarity of responsibility. In other words, a true friendship is kind of freely entered into without any obligations on any part of the party except for to the relationship. But when you bring being a parent into it, or when you bring being a boss into it, there are some expectations there that are different than just being a friend with that person. And so sometimes those things can be in conflict. I would rather use the word of whether it's appropriate to be close with people or to have a good personal relationship with them, because I think that means they understand each other better. But I don't confuse that with the role that you need to play in those two scenarios. Let's just take the one about being a parent as an example. There's no question at all that there's no equity in the relationship when children are very young, right? I mean, even though they you can still be empathetic and listen and be attentive to them, they are totally dependent on you, and they have no ability. There's no capacity to be self-sufficient and to have some kind of equity, shall we say, in the relationship. And I think the biggest trauma that most parents find themselves in, and I am guilty of this myself. I'm no purist in this at all. I have many redos in my life that I've done. Right. Is that parents fail to adapt to the emerging capacity that their children have. So what happens is that, they kind of fix themselves in time as to what their children can and can't do, or what their capacity is or isn't. And then all of a sudden their kids grow up on them, and they assert themselves in their adulthood, and parents have not kept up. And so they haven't taken the time to develop the relationship according to the capacity of the players, that the parent hasn't adjusted to what the child really is able to do on their own, what they're able to express, what's appropriate for them to do, to make their own way, to do all the things that the parent hopes that their child can do when they get grown up. And the child hasn't experienced any kind of, shall we say, a parallel relationship to the parent, except the authoritarian one that they had to have to a certain degree, at least in terms of directivity, when they were very young. So what happens is there's no adapting that's happened, and all of a sudden the kid grows up, and it's a surprise to everybody. I think in the workplace, I think that, and Gordon makes a distinction here, the difference between, shall we say, authority and power, the difference between different forms of power that have to do with the expertise of people, or because of the position that they have in the organization, or those kinds of things, is different than just arbitrary use of power with other people because you happen to have it. So I know of a lot of people, and I prided myself on having relationships with this that I still have to this day, not everybody, but many, where I was tactically responsible and the boss of them and could direct their activities, but also felt that I was available to them as a person who cared about them, and that they felt that, and they knew that I cared about them, but I also cared about them too, and about that relationship. But it takes some talent to be able to separate those things when you have to give bad news, or when you have to make a decision that's going to be hurtful to the other person, or shall we say when the organization's needs trump the relationship. And sometimes that happens. So those are hard things to rectify if you don't have a clear understanding of what you mean by it. I don't know, it's kind of rambling. I don't know if that made sense, but that's been my experience.
No, that makes a lot of sense to me. I would say that I've seen that in both as a parent and as a manager, where, it's interesting. I got this letter from the coach of my daughter's swim team. She's in the swim team. And it wasn't to me specifically. It was sent out a mass email to all the parents. But they had a blurb in there where he said, anything you do for your child that they can do for themselves, when you do that, you're making them weaker. And when you let them do it themselves, you're making them stronger. And I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. And I've applied it not 100%, because I do think that in any relationship, it's nice to do things for someone. Like with my wife, I often will do things that she could certainly do for herself just to be nice.
Yes, right.
That's one of the joys of life, is that kind of giving. And so I've actually, I've had that discussion with my daughter about it. I sat and said, you can do this yourself. You need to do this yourself, or whatever. And, and I've talked to her about that letter, because I thought it was something good for her to know. I'm like, look, part of my job as your parent is to help you to be an independent person.
Yeah.
And if I take care of you and do all these things for you, I'm not allowing you to be strong. I'm making you weaker.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't agree that I should never do anything for you because you could do it yourself, because, I love you, I have a good relationship with you, and I enjoy doing things for you, just like you enjoy doing things for me that I can do for myself.
Yeah.
I don't think that's how two people who are close with each other should behave.
Right, as a gift. You do that as a free will offer,
right,
to them, as opposed to instructive or some other kind of. You're taking your parenting hat off there, and you're doing it as a kindness to somebody you care about.
Sure,
that's a totally different thing.
Right.
But that's what's so interesting about all that, because I think that as relationships grow, they do need to be multifaceted. I mean, there are certain times you do certain things, and there are certain times you do other things, and you do that. Because you're a person and a human as well. And sometimes you're doing it out of obligation. Sometimes you're doing it out of role. That is, you're doing it because it's your job to coach and to train and to teach, because they don't have those skills and they need to learn it. But other times you do it just because it's an offering that you know they'll appreciate and you want to offer it. And they don't, every action doesn't have to satisfy all of those things, you know.
Sure.
Sometimes they satisfy some of it, and sometimes they satisfy others. The other side of the coin, of course, is the parent who struggles so much with having their children experience any kind of pain or frustration and doesn't want to subject them to that, so rescues them or saves them from any of those possibilities. And in those circumstances, I think the adage you heard in your mailing is true, that you're making them weaker without their experience because they don't grow up with any skills in that regard. And so where are they supposed to get it then? If they never had a chance to have that exposure.
Right.
So, you know, it's a, boy, I'll tell you, as you and I both know, if there was one way to get there, you'd probably know what it is by now.
Right.
You know, so.
I think this is also pretty closely directly applicable to the manager role as well. There are people who, when one of their subordinates makes a mistake, they want to dive in and fix it for them.
Yes.
And that can be a mistake to do that. Now, in some cases, maybe you need to do that, but a lot of times, you know, I encourage my people. I'm in the IT field, and in IT, you make mistakes every day.
Yes, right.
You can be the best IT person in the world. I mean, before I got into management, I was IT, and I was always thought very highly of by, you know, all my clients, all my bosses and coworkers. And I would make mistakes all the time, and it wasn't my making mistakes that was a mark of how good I did. It was how I dealt with them.
Yes.
When I would talk to my subordinates and they make a mistake, I'd say, you know, don't worry about it. Everybody makes mistakes. Can you fix it? How do you deal with that mistake going forward? Do you learn from it and learn ways to prevent it from happening again? And that sort of thing. Where some managers are ready to hop in there and fix it for them. I've also had times when subordinates have come to me and said, I don't know what to do with this right here. Or rather, maybe not I don't know what to do, but how do you think I should proceed with this right here?
Yes.
And the first question I always ask is, will you tell me, what do you think?
Yeah, great question. Yeah.
And then go from there. And, you know, if I see they really know what it is to do, I'll tell them, I'm like, look, you know how to do this. You can do it. Go ahead and fix it. If you would like some help, I can work with you directly or arrange for a teammate to come in and help work with you on it. But just let me know. But I'm confident that you can do this yourself. You know, and I've had that exact same conversation with my daughter many times, you know.
Yeah, right. The parallels are interesting, aren't they? Yeah, right.
Yeah. It's like, I know you can do this, sweetheart. I have confidence in you. If you want me to help you, I will. I'll sit here right beside you. But I know you can do it if you try it yourself. I think you can. Yeah,
you know, it's interesting that, you know, you can tell a great story about the whole management structure and the parallels with that in the family. I mean, I think that it is certainly different in the sense that people have a lot harder time, in my experience, establishing, shall we say, the separateness in their family than they do from work. It's really hard. It's a gray area, and it's really hard to allow your children to make mistakes that they don't need to make, or to have them suffer or struggle because they're kind of inextricably part of you, you know. I mean, it's kind of hard to have that separateness, although at the end of the day they are. But at work, it's maybe a little easier that way. But you reminded me of one of the fundamental concepts of L.E.T, which is the whole notion of problem ownership.
Sure.
And bosses that really understand that principle really can capitalize on the talent of their people much better, because they recognize that even if the person doesn't know what to do or is worried about making a mistake and so forth, that doesn't necessarily change the owner of the problem. If it really belongs to them, then the boss needs to really start to behave more as a coach and an instructor and an advisor, as opposed to the rescuer or the determiner. And if they can do that, then over time, their people will build those muscles and become a lot more capable. I can't tell you. I think this is interesting to me, because the theories of good management have been around for quite some time now. But there are still many, many bosses who believe that the position gives them the authority they need to influence their people, and that they really think their job is just basically to do it all. And they don't invest in developing their folks so that they can operate at a higher level. I'm a huge advocate of bosses pushing decisions as far down in the organization as they can get. It gives people satisfaction, gives them challenge, but it also increases the collective skill set of the function. And if it's all centered on the boss, then all their people become are just, conduits to the boss to ask what the boss wants, and you end up with the boss and the proverbial monkey on your back analogy, with all the problems of the world on his shoulders, and the people have none. Those are bosses who can't really relinquish, what they consider to be their responsibility, and that's unsustainable, frankly. In fact, the higher you go in organizations, the more people fall off the path because of that.
Right. Well, I think also when you push the decisions down, you get buy-in. So if you dictate from on high, here is the solution to this problem, your subordinates have no reason to really get behind that solution.
Right.
They could just be like, well, okay, I guess the boss says I have to do this.
Yeah.
Stupid idea, but I'll try and fix it.
Right.
Where meanwhile, if they sit down and they make the decision themselves, they evaluate the pros and cons, and they might come up with the exact same solution that you would have dictated to them. Now it's their decision, and they're behind it. They're like, well, you know what? This is what I picked. I've got to make this work.
Yeah.
You really get buy-in it. That was one of the things that I thought was interesting, and it was a clear difference from P.E.T. When I was reading L.E.T, there was a lot of talk about meetings and the correct way to use meetings.
Ah, yes, right.
And one of the thoughts in there is use group decisions. Don't dictate from on high. Bring your team in when there's a problem and go through brainstorming through the various ideas, and then talk about the pros and cons.
Yeah, through the method 3 process. Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it might be the case where you're the smartest person in the room, but you're not going to make as smart of decisions as you, plus if you're utilizing your brain power, plus the brain power of everybody else in the room. Collectively, that unit is still more intelligent than you are on your own. So.
Oh, right. No way otherwise. Right, exactly.
Right. So if you utilize your team in your decision making, you're going to get better decisions, smarter decisions. You're going to have buy-in, and it's just going to be so much better in so many different ways.
Right. Well, I'll even add on top of that the frequency of bosses deciding the decision on behalf of their people when they've been for some time fairly removed from the topic at hand. Then they are making decisions, and they're probably in many cases the least qualified to do it because they're not in it. They're making an opinion or judgment from old data or what they used to know or how they used to do it or whatever it might be, where the team is current.
Sure.
They are in it and know exactly what's happening right now. So the odds of the boss having the best solution is pretty slim anyway, but it's even slimmer because of that, because they're just not as engaged in it. So, but a lot of bosses think that's what they're supposed to do. Their job is to make the call. They're the deciders.
Right. Right.
So it takes some doing to get them off that, because I think there's a certain amount of risk in many cases in their mind that if they somehow let the team take the lead, they're losing control of some kind. And also, let's be realistic. Above them, they don't care if the team's doing it or if they're doing it or who's doing it. They want the answer and they want it now. And so sometimes that boss has to keep, the folks above him or her at bay too, if they want to practice this idea.
Sure. And they think, well, my ass is on the line for it, so I should make the decision, but you're not going to get as good of a decision, though, if you go that way. So.
Right. And that's why the balance is so difficult, as we talked about early on in this conversation about, trying to balance the organization's needs with the needs of your people and your own. I mean, that's the juggling act that's difficult to do.
Right. Well, this has been a great conversation, Steve. Thanks so much for coming on. If my listeners would like to find out more, how would they get a hold of you?
Well, I do have a website, and it is www.crandallpartners.com, and it's CRANDALL partners, one word, .com. And my email is steve@crandallpartners.com, and so they could reach me either one of those ways.
Okay, great. And I'll be sure to list that in the show notes as well.
Good, wonderful. Well, I appreciate your interest in all this. It's wonderful to have kindred spirits out there. And, if people are interested in more about this, they can also communicate directly with Gordon Training International, which is important for you to note, too, because they're out in San Diego area, and they're the primary providers of this program, and where it all began with Tom Gordon. So their website is very informative as well about the various programs they offer, but also some of the philosophy behind it.
Right. Well, I'm interested in it, one, because it's effective, but two, I really think it makes the world a better place, both in the home with the parent effectiveness training, or with your spouse using these methods that Thomas Gordon created, and as well as in the workplace. It's a world that I want to live in. I want to live in.
I hear you. It's been very. I'd say the same thing. It's been very helpful to me in my life. I've seen it in action in many organizations. It works, but it's also a state of mind that is a lot more pleasant to have.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks for being a guest on Choice Conversation, Steve.
Great. Thanks so much.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Steve Crandall. I've got a link to his website in the show notes, crandallpartners.com, as well as to Gordon Training International, their website, which is a tremendous resource for L.E.T. If you enjoyed this episode, do me a huge favor and share it with all your friends. Tell a friend about it, share it on social media and whatnot. I would be hugely appreciative. All right. Take care of yourselves. Have a great day. Or not. The choice is yours.